On today's video, we're going to make a steak platter. But before we start, let's go ahead and look at this quick ad and we'll dive right into the modeling. See you there. Okay guys, welcome back. Let's go ahead and dive in and get started. In this video, this one's going to be a little bit more in depth, but I'm going to break it down into two videos. In the first video, what I want to do is model the steak, the platter, and all the stuff that goes with it. And then the second one, we're going to focus on texturing and presentation. So first thing I want to do is clear out my scene. I've already brought in a reference photo. This photo I will probably make available for you. I don't have copyright to use it, so if you can find a steak on Google or something, if I decide not to post it, just go ahead and do that. But first of all, what I want to do is I want to tackle this bone. So what I did is I brought in a single vertices and I'm basically tracing the outline of this bone, as you see right here. You're going to see me do a lot of the minutia in this one. So this one, parts of this video are going to be like watching paint dry, but I think it's important to actually show you what I actually do in order to make some of this stuff. So go ahead, and I'm extruding and hitting, once I hit extrude, I'm just dragging out vertices to basically trace the outline of these shapes here to start off with. I am essentially creating my primitive shapes. So I'm just going in and tracing. Doesn't have to be perfect. I'm not trying to get every single little corner, because once we run sub D on some of this stuff, as we've known in other videos, sub D is going to do a lot of the rounding work for us. Just keep tracing it out. And I'm doing this in real time, not as I record, but this is the actual one shot of this steak I did. This is like basically a one take. Going to make sure I get verts around all of these little pieces right here. And when you got these two vertices, I want to merge by center, just to make sure all this is tied together as one piece of geometry. So I'll select everything. And what I want to do is I want to go ahead and just kind of tighten it up a little bit, because eventually I'm just going to fill this as one big giant ingon. Seeing this outline for me is just a little bit easier, so I'm just going ahead and tighten it up a little bit before I fill it. But that is the plan. Okay, so select everything, and I'm going to fill it. And we have one big giant ingon, but that's okay for now. So I want to give this a name in the outliner. And note, if you notice the layout of my outliner, I've got everything set up in objects, lights, cameras, and then the reference. So now what I want to go in here, I want to go here and tighten up the topology a little bit, because this is going to allow us to do some other things. This is going to allow us to get some density, and you'll see why we need density here before it's all said and done. So I'm just taking the knife tool, I'm just kind of going here and tying in some of these verts. I'm not trying to make it super pretty yet. I'll do that. I'll probably do that offline, because it's a bit time consuming. But there is a trick to kind of get it started that I'll show you in this video. Just kind of going here and tying these verts together, basically making quads, big quads. And these will serve as guides for Blender to kind of finish off the geometry, clean the geometry up for me, so I don't have to manually do all of this, because this would literally take all day. And all I'm doing here, guys, is I'm just kind of eyeballing, you know, grids of 4 of vertices and just making quick quads. Like I said, I'm not concerned about them being the prettiest topology right now. I'm gonna let Blender do some of that work for me, and then if I see something that looks kind of screwy, I'll just kind of clean it up manually offline. I'm just trying to limit my work, in other words. And this is one of the portions in the video I was talking about that you will see on occasion that's going to be like watching paint dry. For those of you here on my videos that know this stuff and know how to do this, this section wasn't added in for your benefit as much as for new viewers, because I'm constantly getting newer people that are watching the video. So this is really for beginners. I'm just throwing something a little bit more advanced at you. I'm gonna grab these 2 verts, and then I'm going to subdivide between them. That's going to add another vert in between them, and then I can double G, slide it along that edge, and basically I'm just adding it in there so I can move that out and put like a little notch there, and it gives me a quads based solution down there where normally I would have had a triangle. All right, so now that looks good enough, and now what I want to do is extrude it to give it some thickness. You additionally could have used a solidify modifier here, but for me, I just chose to go this route. I hit Shift N to recalculate normals. That just covers you in the event your normals are off. And I went in and checked normals, so it's all blue, so it's all good. So now we've got the primitive of that rib bone for the ribeye here that you're seeing in the screen. So I'm gonna save out my file. I'm looking at it in front ortho and just kind of seeing how this all looks. And then I'm going to come in here, and I want to add in a subdivision modifier. I'm going to set it to 2, and notice I'm going to click simple and set Catmull Clark, and that's basically not going to change the shape, but it's going to add in quads. It's going to convert everything to quads in terms of topology. So as you look around here on the other side, you see Blender went in and did the work for me with a 2nd level subdivision, so it made it more dense. Now that's one quick trick to get like really nice topology started off of an N-gon. Or I should say not an N-gon necessarily, but just, you know, whatever kind of shape you got. So now I'm going to come in here and I want to make that little piece of meat that's on the opposite side of that rib bone. So I'm going to literally do the same thing. I'm bringing in a single vert. I'm in a new object right now, essentially. And I'm just going to trace this piece of meat that you're seeing here in the reference photo. I'm going to trace it out just like I did with the bone. But keep in mind, this is going to be a separate object because I want to be able to deal with it differently than the bone. And yet again, since there's not much to trace, if you notice, I'm going a lot faster this time because I showed you guys with the bone kind of like the methodology and the thinking around doing this. And if you notice, I'm going a little bit past that bone or into where that bone is with this shape, because when we run sub D is going to shrink it up. It's going to suck it in a little bit. So I want to overshoot my landing a little bit in terms of my verts so that I can compensate for that. Also, when you see what I do to get that meat texture, it'll make sense to you if you have any familiarity with Blender at all. You guys are going to get it immediately why I did this. All right, just kind of coming in here, just basic, you know, basic shape of this thing. I'm not trying to get super detailed. So when you get down to that last vert, select the last one and the first one, hit M for merge, and then merge to center. And then just as a precaution, I selected all the versions, merged by distance. So now I'm going to fill it as an N-gon, and then I'm going to go in with knife tool just like we did before and kind of do the same operation. I'm just going to make quads out of this thing, because what I'm trying to do is get some topology together here so I can then do my little trick with sub D and get Blender to fill in everything else and to clean it up. If you notice, we got an orphan there. I'm gonna go ahead and fix him. Knife tool is really nice because it'll allow me to very quickly create vertices and geometry in places that I didn't do beforehand. And yet again, I want a vert right here, so I'm going to select these two and then do a subdivide between them. That's going to create an additional one, and then I'll double G it down along that edge. Get it close. I don't want it right on top, and then that way I can hit G and then like arbitrarily move it where I want, and it still gives me a quads based solution down here for that piece of that geometry. Okay, so now since this is going to be a thicker part as well, right now it's just a flat plane. I'm gonna select it, and I want to do the sub D trick to it on level 2, and then I'm going to apply it. That's going to bake in the geometry there. And I say bake in loosely, not bake as in the actual operation of baking. So now I'm going to give it a name, and under that same collection, I'm going to put this object here as well. Okay, so now we've done with the first two parts, the bone and then that little piece of meat on the back side of that bone where it was cut. All right, so I'm okay with this so far. So now I want to go ahead and select this in edit mode, and now I'm going to do the extrude trick to give it some thickness. And I want it to go out on the slightly on the side of that bone, like a little bit wider than that bone is. About like that. So now I see you got long faces there at the top, so I'm gonna run one loop there, because I think 2 is just gonna make it a little too dense, and it's just gonna make those edges real hard when we actually run the Catmull Clark sub D on it. So what do that, save the file, and right now it doesn't look like steak at all, but trust me, it will. So now we're going to create the eye. We're going to literally for the third time do the same thing. I'm bringing my single vert, and the eye is that main piece of meat right there in the middle. So I'm going to trace it. Bear with me if you're watching this video. Just stay with the video, guys. I know some of us at times have short attention spans, but this video is a blend of technique that's really catered for new beginners to Blender who want to learn, but also some of you guys who have been in it for a little bit and want to learn some more advanced stuff. Even though none of my videos are very advanced, not yet, but this was my attempt to like take one video and cater it to both of those groups. So for those of you guys who know how to do this, if you don't mind, just stick with the video. Don't bail on it because you're like, I know how to do that. So you might learn something actually. So I'm cutting into that cap because in my head right now what's happening is I'm visualizing what this is going to act like and look like when I apply certain techniques and modifiers to this that I think might get me that steak texture and shape sooner than later, so I don't have to literally hand model or do crazy texture tricks to make it look like a steak. In this version, you're going to actually see some real geometry in here. And that's what I want, because I'm shooting for a little bit higher level of realism with this final product. Once we do the texturing in the second video, you'll see. All right. So this is the painstaking part. I'm putting in all the work to build the foundation. And you'll see as we get the foundation built, things going to go a whole lot quicker. And at least in my opinion, I think that the end result's going to be a lot better because we spent a little bit more time in doing the groundwork. All right, so now I'm just still extruding. I took that single vertices and I'm essentially creating one big giant ingon, a big flat object like a plane. And essentially you can look at this as nothing more than, like, say if you're in Photoshop or another tool similar to that and you're running the pen tool to create like a mat or garbage mat or mask or something like that, and you're tracing the shape of a person or an object, literally this is exactly what I'm doing, but in Blender. And right now it's just a 2D operation. So just keep that in mind. That's literally what I'm doing, because I'm not trying to use a primitive like a circle to create this, because I'm gonna have to manipulate it so much to get this shape. It's not worth it. This is just, for me, this is just a quicker way of getting the shape I actually want. All right, so yet again, I tied it off, did the merge to center, select the whole thing. I'm tabbing out, so now it's one big Ingon. I'm gonna give this a name in the outliner in the same collection as well. So this is the eye. And I went in and manually tried to put in some topology here. It's good enough. It ain't the prettiest thing, but wait till you see what we do to it. It ain't gonna really matter a whole lot. All right, so I'm doing an extrusion thing, and since this is the eye of the steak, this is the thick part of the steak that you mainly would eat. I want to bring it in. I want to make it a little bit thicker than the bone and the little meat on the back of the bone. All right. So now what I ended up doing, because I'm trying to trim some of the video out because I don't want it too long, I ran a cloth sim on that eye. And what I'm doing now is I'm going in here and I'm screwing with settings to get it to look like I'm wanting it to look. And right now it doesn't look anything like I want it to look. So I'm playing with the shrinking factor under the shape. I got gravity set to 0 so it doesn't fall down below the scene here. And then I'm playing with shrinking factor and pressure primarily, and then going through the frames. And if you notice, this is pretty dense, so it's slowing down my Mac quite a bit. And I'm just waiting till I start seeing keyframes that kind of mimic the texture of something that could be a steak. Notice I said could be a steak. Doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be good enough. That's what I'm shooting for, good enough right here. And in my head, the cloth sim seemed like the smartest thing to get me closest to that result. See how it's starting to look like steak now? So I get to a frame that I like, and then I pause the simulation. And you'll notice, I wanted you guys to see this. I'm doing this a number of times, and I'm playing with settings. As I feel like I'm getting closer, I start tweaking settings to see how close I can really get, right? And then I just run through the sim again. And the reason why I'm so sluggish on this machine that you're seeing while I'm recording, because I'm recording the video in 4K, number 2, I got 32-bit color depth. That's eating resources. I'm running this big sim in Blender. And I got a lot of stuff running in the background, but this is a pretty capable machine, at least for a Mac it is. So I'm just taking my sweet time and getting it right until I find the frame that looks right, that I'm willing to commit to. Because once I commit to this frame, other than me baking it, and I'm trying to do it all without having to bake all of these frames out. So now I'm good with that, so I'm going to convert it to a mesh. That looks enough like steak to me, at least a good start. It's not gonna be perfect. It still looks like a balloon, but watch. Just bear with me. This is gonna work. And this was literally an idea I had to solve this problem. I didn't know if it was gonna work or not. I'd never seen anybody do it. All right, so now I'm going in and I'm taking that piece of meat at the top, and because it worked good enough for, at least for me, on the eye, I'm going back up here in that little top part, and I want to run the same technique. Basically, I'm using the same trick that you use to inflate a balloon or inflate text or inflate anything in Blender. Just, like I said, just like before with that eye, I'm going here and playing with settings. And I'm letting the playhead run down in the timeline the whole time, because that actually shows the simulation. If you're wondering why it's just still running, that's why. And when you see me pause it, I'm pausing because I hit a frame that either I'm interested in, or you'll see I'll hit shift on the keyboard and then the left key on the keyboard that takes me back to the first frame, because I'm trying to reset the simulation. and start it from scratch, because it so it'll recalculate from that first frame and show me my changes. See, I just don't have enough geometry up there to really get the effect I want. But guess what? It don't matter, because when you see what we do to it next, you're gonna get it. I just want to get it good enough, like I said. All right. Uh-oh, now it's doing some funkiness. It looks like an amoeba or something flying in some water. See, some of this can be a little time consuming. But these are the things I wanted you guys to see. And you'll see why it took me so long to get this video out. Other than the fact I've been really busy, but I spent more time thinking about how I wanted to tackle this. I didn't even know if I could do it, to be honest with you. I was just like, I've never made a steak before. I've never really done a whole lot of food. I've done some things like burgers and things like that, hot dogs. I did a bowl of ravioli, I think, once for a scene. But I don't do a lot of food. I find it interesting, but I just don't do a lot of food. And I had never done a steak like this before from scratch. And I was just like, hey, let's just make a video. Let's see if people like it, and let's see if I can actually pull it off. So I spent a lot more time thinking about how to do this, and then I just decided to jump in it and do it. So you guys are getting the benefit of that. All right, so now I'm getting to a point where I'm just kind of tired of playing with it. So let's just convert this to a mesh. So I have now committed it. That pulls it out of the cloth sim. So if I change the playhead or something, nothing gets screwed up. So now this piece right here, that real tender piece on the end of the ribeye, is called the cap. Another word is the spinalis, because it comes from the spinalis muscle of the cow. And what I'm doing is I hid the eye so I can see what I'm actually selecting. And I think now for the fourth time, I'm going to go in here with that single vert and trace this thing. And just like before, I'm just going to let you guys see it. I promise you, this is the worst part of the video in terms of the boring stuff. But you're going to see this come together here in a few minutes. And this is a part where you can just kind of sit back and listen to the little background music while I do my thing here. And I am trying to get, in this case, I am trying to get a little bit more of these little jaggedy pieces, because I just think that it might add to some of the realism. And I'm thinking also that when I run that cloth sim on this, maybe it will keep a lot of those pieces. When I run that shrinking factor on it and it just scales it down, it like kind of, you can look at the shrinking factor in that it like adds wrinkles to the material. So like if you look at a sofa, or if I were to make like a raisin or something in Blender, I would try to use this technique to get the overall effect of a wrinkled raisin, at least initially, and then I go in later and clean it up. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get the biggest bang for the smallest buck. What gets me to the finish line quickest with enough detail that all I really got to do is focus on cleaning it up or tweaking it. This was the purpose of me choosing a cloth sim to do this. And like I've said in other videos, when you do this type of work and you're getting paid by a client, a big client, time is absolutely 100% time is money. So you don't really have, I mean, even for like the best artists in the world, they may want to just hand sculpt all that stuff. I mean, by the time you're hand sculpting stuff and you're working on one piece of work, somebody like me that's used to doing the corporate thing and rolling fast and getting a lot done and being very efficient with their time, I can knock out like 20 or 30 other things and be taking on more work. So yeah, it's a balance. You gotta look at it like that if you're gonna do this for a living. All right. Some of you here may say, well, as slow as you're going tracing that, they could have traced like 30 more pieces like this. What it's taking me to do this one. Yeah, you're right. What it was is I was on a screen and I'm trying to look at the outline and it literally in real time as me when I was doing this, I was trying to figure out where the edges of this thing was. Wasn't that easy to see, believe it or not. All right, so I'm down here at the last. I do merge by center, select everything, merge by distance, just to make sure I don't have any weird stuff. And if you see down there in the little notification, remove 0 vertices, that means we're all good. So now I'm going to give this one a name in the outliner. That's the cap, and as you can see, the eye is hidden. I'm going to bring it back into the view. And I'm just kind of fast forwarding to trim this video down a little bit. I got the cloth sim already on, and I want you guys to kind of see me going through that process again, at least with the cap here, trying to get it to look like the cap on a ribeye would look, or at least close enough, so all I have to do from there is tweak it. I'm just kind of going here into some of the settings in the cloth sim and trying to get it close. My settings may not be the exact same settings you would use for your version, and I'll tell you why. One reason why is when you guys follow along and make this thing, your scale may be different than mine. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you want to get the scale that I was using, and this is a good little thing that makes you a little bit more astute at Blender. If you go back to the original part of the video where you saw where I made the bone, if you go ahead and look at the grid in the 3D environment, the viewport in the background, that tells you the scale that I was building it at. That's like a little trick. You can eyeball that and kind of get the scale close to where I was by counting the squares. All right, it's getting there, guys. Still looks like an inflatable balloon. Looks like a life raft or something. But in your mind, what you have to do is you have to, so like whatever material you're using for modeling, you got to kind of visually filter through that and kind of imagine this is what this is going to look like once you apply your texture to it. And your eyes and your brains are really focused on the shape of it more so than how shiny it is and that kind of thing. Because to me, it looks like, if I'm visually just looking at it aesthetically, how it is, it looks like an inflatable raft. And see where it's like kind of cutting into the eye a little bit. I'm going into sculpting mode in Blender, and I'm changing the brush, and then we can use the clay brush and fill that back in. See, just like I just did. And the brushes here in sculpting mode is going to allow me to kind of make this look more like the piece of steak. It's going to allow me to flatten certain areas, pull some of this geometry back. It's going to allow me to smooth some stuff off. It's going to allow me to put in some creases and some little notches and niches and stuff like that. That was the whole plan. So now you saw I did cloth sim and then I followed up with sculpting, because cloth sim gave me enough geometry where like when I'm starting to sculpt, it's nice and clean. And I'm not trying to overdo it with the sculpting either. And since this is going to be a still object and not rigged for any kind of animation, I don't need to do any type of retopology work on this. I mean, if you wanted to, you could, but I just don't care to for this particular object. And this might be one of the first. Now I think I did another video one time back where I used sculpting, but I never really went in depth with it. Maybe at some point I'll do a video where like really the whole basic subject matter of the video is using the sculpting tools, but I'm just not there yet. All right, so this bone, if you look at the rest of the meat and then you look at the bone looks like super flat and super fake. And what I want to do here is I just want to give this a little bit of love in the sculpting here so we can try to make this bone look somewhat realistic, because I'm going to hide imperfections when we start doing the texturing in the second video. So right here is that little divot. I want to make that little divot in the bone that you usually see when you got like the bone marrow. I think the bone marrow's in there once you cut it. I just want something that looks similar to it. So make it a little bit bigger, brush, and then I'm going to change over to the clay strips. I just want to give it some imperfections here, and that's the whole purpose of me using this. If you hit the left mouse button, and granted I have a digital tablet with a pen on it, the stylus, this would have been better to use for that. However, for this video, I'm explicitly using my mouse because some of you here who may try to make this, you may not have a tablet, and I want you to see that this can be done without a tablet. Tablet's not required, but it does make the end result a lot better. All right, so I'm just kind of lightly stroking it. If you hold down the command or the control key on, like if you're on a PC, it does the opposite effect. So where you have a brush that pushes things outward, like it blobs it out, I can use that control or command key. Actually, I told you incorrectly. It's not command on the Mac, it's control key on the Mac. So if you use the control key on the Mac, control key on PC, it'll do the opposite effect. So where it normally would go out, it'll go in. So I can create like these little trench shapes with it. The only part about this is very difficult with the mouse is the hand control, number one, and number two, the pressure sensitivity. You have to manually adjust the pressure sensitivity every time you want to do a stroke, whereas a pen is just very natural, like drawing. But you'll see the version of this bone I come up with, and I'm only just adding imperfections and stuff in here. I'm just kind of trying to screw this bone up on purpose. You'll see the version we come up with that I think works. And that's why once you're doing sculpting and things like that, you want pretty good dense geometry, because it gives you a whole lot of, it'll give you a lot of faces in there that are densely packed that you can manipulate, and it just gives you a cleaner result. You get a lot better deformations. Now I'm holding shift, and that's just like smoothing everything out. Yet again, this would have been better on a pen, but I chose not to use it on purpose. And all I'm trying to do is like all of that sculpting I just did, I'm just trying to smooth it out a little bit so it's not as harsh looking. And there might be places where I want it to be a little more harsh than others, so I'm applying less smoothing there. Even though this bone looks beat all to get up, really doesn't look like a real steak bone, but it'll work. All right, so let's save this out. So now if you look at this, this looks more like a steak, guys. And for all intensive purposes, we're essentially done modeling the steak. So let's go ahead and move into all of the stuff that goes with it for the scene. So now what I want to do is I'm bringing in a cube empty. One last thing I want to do with the steak. Bringing the cube empty, I'm sizing it up to the steak as close as possible. Now what I want to do is I want to parent all of those pieces of the steak, the bone, the meat behind the bone, the eye, and the cap. I want to parent all of those objects to that empty, and then that empty is going to be the empty that controls that whole model. So when I move that empty, everything moves with it. That's essentially what I'm trying to do. So then I'm parenting with transforms, and now the modeling is done technically, and that looks like a steak to me. Is it perfect? Nope, but it's going to pass the sniff test. Okay, so now we're done with the steak. Let's create a plate for it. So now what I want to do is I'm going here and bring in a primitive. I'm adding in a circle. I'm going to change it to my view, and I'm going to scale it up. This is going to be super easy, guys. Right now it's a bit small, but I will scale it up here in a minute. Make it bigger. So right now that steak looks like a dinosaur steak against the size of this plate. That's why scale is important. So basically I'm extruding, and then I'm changing the side, and that's kind of bringing it in here like that. And then I'm gonna grid fill it. Boom. So this is basically, I just made a circle that's filled in with all quads. It's all I've done thus far. And it's flat. Just like our plane, and just like how we started modeling out the pieces of the steak. Everything was super flat. So now I'm going to turn here to the side, and I want to move the flat plate or flat circle down below the steak. And I'm just kind of eyeballing it and looking at it to see if it's further enough down from it that it's good. So I'm taking that circle that was in that collection, and I'm going to put it in its own collection. I'm just kind of thinking up a name for it. And I did plates plural in the event that I came in later and put another plate into the scene, which I don't end up doing. Now I'm going to give the actual object a name. Now I want to isolate the plate because I want to give the plate its shape. So what I'm going to go do is come in here and face edit mode. And what I want to do is I'm going to hit the C key on the keyboard to allow me to select faces. And I'm going to come in here and start selecting faces, but I didn't want that in the center. So I'm going to come back here and start all over. And I'm going to select all of these faces that are kind of on the edge here. These four faces that go out to the rim of the plate. I'm going to select all these guys. And once I'm done with this tool here, the selection tool, I right click on my mouse and it will disengage the tool and take me back out to where I can like grab stuff and select stuff and that kind of thing, just like you just saw me do. So now what I want to do to give this plate its shape is I want to bring this up on with G on, and then restrict it to the y-axis. This is why you guys always see me working in ortho mode when I start my modeling, because it just makes it easy to move stuff. I'm gonna select that edge and I'm gonna put a nice little bevel there. So when I sub D this plate, it'll keep that nice little shape right there. And this time I do want to run a solidify modifier, so I'm going to run solidify, and I'm just going to give it a nice little edge here. I want to apply that solidify modifier once I get the edge where I want it. And then I'm going to go in and edit edge select mode, and I'm going to select these edges around the rim of the plate, and I'm going to give them a nice little tight bevel for the same reason why I gave that inner part a bevel. And essentially that's the plate. Now all I got to do is run sub D on it, so I do a level 2 sub D and shade smooth, and guys, the plate is finished. There you are, nice little plate. So now I can bring the scene back, and now you see the steak is sitting on the plate. Here's where I realize the plate is too small, so I can come in here later and resize the plate. So now I bring in the camera, because I'm just right now, I've got enough of the scene set up to where I can start like trying to figure out how I want to composite this shot. And I'm changing the focal length. I want 80mm because I want it similar to a portrait shot where everything just looks kind of flat. I don't have a lot of weird like camera perspective. And I'm going to GG it, and then middle mouse button, hold it down and move out to scale it back out, scale the camera back out, or dolly it out. And I think that's a good start for composition. I'm not worrying about centering it with the composition guys are in it just yet. All right, that looks pretty good. All right, so here's when I realized my plate's too doggone small. So let's edit mode, edit vertices mode. Let's just scale it up. Doesn't change any of my geometry at all. And then I want that steak to be offset because I want to make room for a couple other things I want to put on the plate. And I'm just looking at the bottom of the plate because since I scaled it up, that I knew that was going to make the steak eat into the plate a little bit more. So I'm just bringing the plate back. I don't want the steak hovering over in the air above it, but I know it's going to hover a little bit. But from the angles in which you going to shoot it at with the camera, you're not going to notice it. As long as I don't see hard shadows up under there, we're good. So now I'm going to go and take a quick look at this. And what I want to do is I want to bring in a plane. I'm going to rotate it on X, 90. And I want to apply the rotation. So now I'm going to go back into edit mode and I want to scale up super big. This is going to be the table that the steak and the plate and all the other stuff sits upon. And then I'm going to subdivide it a few times because I'm going to put a material on it later that will have some displacement involved with it. And having that geometry in there is going to help with really nice looking displacement. All right, so now I'm just kind of getting it close to the plate. I'm all in my mind, you guys don't know this, so I'll tell you. In my mind right now, I'm thinking about displacement. I don't want the plate sitting directly on the surface of that table because displacement will usually take the normals and shoot them upward. And it will then eat into the plate and possibly the steak, depending on what type of displacement is used and how much of it's used. So I'm factoring that in mentally as I pull that back. So right now that plate is hovering above that table. But you'll see, I got a little bit closer than I need it, but you'll see I'll back it off for that reason. But I am thinking about that at that time. So there's the plate, there's the table, there's the steak. So now I'm going to go in outliner, I'm going to give that table a name. And I want to put it in its own collection. And I'm going to give that collection a name. I don't know. Furniture just seemed to make a lot of sense at the time. And then I do my little color thing so I can quickly see models from lights, from cameras, from reference, right? So now let's stick a stick of butter up there because, you know, what good is this steak without a stick of butter? So let's bring in a cube primitive. Let's scale it way down to roughly the size of a stick of butter. Now, granted, you guys don't see this, but offline on another screen, I'm actually looking at a reference photo of a ribeye with a stick of butter stuck on top of it. So I'm just kind of scaling it down and I'm literally eyeballing it. I'm not measuring it or anything like that. So I got the relative size like I want it. Now let me scale it just a little bit. And then what I want to do is subdivide it because I want a lot of geometry in it because we're going to deform it. It's too perfect right now. And you don't need to go crazy because I don't need a stick of butter to be too dense. Let's go into edit mode. Let's go into sculpt mode, I should say. And let's just let's not overdo any overkill here, but let's just kind of make it look like it could be butter that's melting and deforming it a little bit. So I want to make sure the edges are imperfect and kind of bent and gnarled up a little bit. So I'm just using the clay strips brush here. This is a brush that a lot of people use for character modeling, like faces and adding muscles to a face. I'm using it for something simple like a piece of butter. So I'm just kind of looking around the whole little piece of butter here, and like I said, I just don't want it to look like a perfect cube that somebody slapped up on a scene. Get around these sides, these corners. I want to get around the back. Even though you don't see the back, I want to make sure I just hit it anyway. And keep in mind, we haven't even run sub D on it yet, so sub D is gonna make it a little nicer even still. So now I go back to object mode and I'm gonna run a level 2 sub D, and now look at that, guys, we got a stick of butter. Shade smooth it. So now I'm gonna give it a name in the outliner so we know what we're working with here, what objects we're working with. Yeah, and it can stay in this collection. I'm cool with that because it's technically related to the steak. I just don't want it parented to the steak. So now let's kind of move it into place, give it a little bit of rotation here. And I want it sitting down there in that little divot area of the eye of the steak. So now I'm going into side view and I'm just going to make sure it's just laying right on the top of the surface. If it eats into the geometry a little bit, that's fine. All right. So now we got butter, we got steak, we got a plate. What else should we put on here? I'm thinking asparagus and tomatoes. So let's fast forward into the video here. So I brought in a reference photo of some asparagus I found online. Went to a search engine, did an image search, literally all I did. And I'm just looking for a good enough picture so I can see what asparagus looks like, so I can get the basic shape. So now I'm bringing in a circle primitive. I'm going to edit mode and I'm going to scale it down. Now out of all of these asparagus, I'm looking for the one that looks most straight. Because once I can build it straight, I can make it look bent and deformed like all the other ones pretty easy. So I'm just going to take this circle, I'm going to extrude it up. Extrude it up. Extrude it up. Extrude it up. Now one thing I am taking into account is I notice is the further up I go, the diameter of the circle gets smaller because it goes up almost into, you know, it's not really a point, but it kind of goes up in that pattern of a point, right? So I'm kind of keeping that in mind too. If you notice, I'm scaling that circle down as I get it closer to the top. Now what I'm trying to do here is I'm not trying to get all that detail in the top of the asparagus, because there's ways we can do that with textures, but I'm just trying to get that basic shape. We can take a texture map and put in all the little nuggets and little detail bits later and just kind of like fake it, because that's how most people do it anyway. They don't carve all that detail in. So I'm zooming in so I can get a little bit better visibility on it. And like I said, it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. I'm just trying to get it close, because once you put all the elements together in the scene, it's just going to work. Scaling it down, and I got one little bit at the top, that little tip up there. Let's zoom in a little bit better so we can see it, and I'm going to scale it in, and then I'm going to offset it with G and kind of move it over there to that edge. And like I said, I'm modeling in ortho, so if I hit G and X, I know it's going on X. Global X, not local X. So now I'm going to bring that in with extrude and S, and then grid fill it. And then I basically capped off the top of that shape. Now I've got to go down to the bottom and do the same thing, because this was a circle, so it was not filled when I made it. I'm going to do the edit mode for edges, and then I'm going to do extrude and scale it in, and then I'm going to grid fill it down here as well. And just like that, we got the primitive shape of that asparagus. So now one thing I want to do is I want to do some like topo cleanup. So I'm going to do like a nice little bevel right here. So I'm gonna run sub D, it's gonna clean it up, and I got all these long faces, so I need to address that. So the best way to address that is putting in some loop cuts. This is we're essentially adding density to our geometry here. So it's gonna allow us to do some pretty cool stuff with it here. So I'm going in here at all these sections where we got these long faces, and I'm just kind of, you know, adding some geometry in here. Video's going a little bit faster now, or I should say our modeling is going a little bit faster now. So these are the boring things that most of the time, like now, like recently, I've been cutting out of the videos, but in this one I want you guys to see it, because these things are kind of important. All right, so now we've got this piece of asparagus, and I only need one piece. I only need to model this once. There's cool stuff I could do with geometry nodes and multiply it and do all kind of crazy stuff, but number one, I'm not a master at geometry nodes. I know enough to be dangerous, but two, I didn't want to divert off on the video to the geometry nodes video, because that wasn't the purpose of it. So I intentionally stayed clear of it for this one. All right, so let's give this asparagus a name in the outliner, and then let's move it to its own collection. And if you notice, look how big it is as compared to our plate here. But that's easy to fix. So we go in edit mode, select everything, and scale it down. Doesn't change our geometry. So come back out of edit mode and object mode, and then from here I can do a shift D, which is creating a copy or a duplicate. So it's basically making another individual piece of asparagus. And I notice that my origin is off, so I'm setting the origin to geometry so I can rotate it along its geometric center. And you're gonna see them overlapping and stuff. I don't show this on, I do this offline, don't show how I did it, but essentially I went in with an edit mode, selected an edge, did proportional editing, and then brought it up where the asparagus are laying on top of each other versus literally intersecting in terms of geometry, which clearly will look fake. But it was so time consuming. I mean, it wasn't crazy, but it was time consuming enough I didn't want to put that in the video. But you'll see it right now. Everything is flat and straight, like razor sharp. They're just stiff. You'll see I addressed that offline. But I figured it was worth mentioning to you about it, number one, and number two, telling you how I actually solved that problem. So I'm moving the cursor here and then basically rotating it on the cursor, so I can basically use the cursor as a pivot point. And that way I don't have to change the geometric center when I rotate. So I'm just moving the cursor there at the tip. And what I want to do is I don't want to get too repetitious with showing you the same thing over and over again, because you guys get bored and leave. So what we do here eventually is I show it enough times just to kind of reinforce it, and then you're going to see I will cut a lot of this asparagus making out of the video. I'm showing a third time. There's a third one. I'm just kind of rotating it, because notice I'm still rotating on the 3D cursor. So now, bam, I just added them all in there just to speed it up. And if you notice, the asparagus are laying on top of each other, or one would be laying under another. They're not stiff anymore. They got some bend to them. They have some deformation to them. So I'm putting these guys in a collection. And I'm gonna do a little color thing because these are models. And the last element I think I want to put on the plate to show how I made it will be the tomatoes. So let's look at it in cycles. So yeah, I mean, that looks like a steak. There's no texture even on it yet. So imagine this when the texture gets on it. So what I want to do here with the asparagus is just like I did with the steak. I'm bringing in a cube empty, and then I'm going to wrap the cube empty around the asparagus, and then I'm gonna parent all the asparaguses to that cube empty. So if when I want to move all the asparaguses at one time, or rotate them, or rescale them, or in terms of size or whatever, I can do it through that empty, which essentially will be the parent. So let's go look at it on the side, because I don't need the empty to be that thick. So we're just gonna scale it down on that axis, on that y-axis there. May help if I grab the right object. All right, I think that's good enough. So let's give this empty a name. And what I want to do is I want to grab everybody in here. And I'm going to parent them with the transforms. Bam. And now it's all, if you look at the outliner, you only see one thing there, but you do see a chevron that you can click on that shows that there's hierarchy. And when you open that up, you'll see all the individual objects of asparaguses. I guess it's the pull for an asparagus. You'll see all the other objects up under it, in other words. So now I can rotate it with one thing. Use that empty, rotates the whole, or all of it right on the plate just like I want, or can move them or whatever. That way I'm not going in there and individually having to move every object when I'm trying to do anything. However, if I want to individually move them, I still can. I can just go in there and move them individually at that one point. And then if I want to move them all together, I can choose the empty, and then it will retain my individual changes, if that makes sense. So I'm just kind of looking at this from the side. Just make sure everybody's sitting on the plate, not in the plate, not hovering over the plate, that sort of thing. So I'm done with the asparagus, other than just like little minute tweaking right here. So now I'm going in and we're going to model tomatoes. So I'm bringing in a quad sphere. It's essentially a sphere made up of all quads. And if you don't see it in your Blender, you have to go into the properties, go under add-ons, and then find extra object. I think it's under extra objects, but it comes with Blender, and you have to install that and enable it, and it's going to give you more mesh primitives to deal with, and that one will be in there. So I'm basically bringing in a ball, if you can look at it like that. But I want one that was all quads because I can work with quads better in terms of my modeling. And I don't care if it's not perfectly round, because there's tricks to make that thing perfectly round like a UV sphere is. But I don't really care because we're going to deform it anyway. It's round enough. All right, so I'm bringing in cloth, because we're heavily using cloth today, guys. Cloth to me was like the key to making all of this work. So I'm going in here, I'm selecting a 2x2 grid of faces. I'm going to go into vertex groups, and I'm going to call this the little part. And essentially what I'm trying to do here is when we run the cloth sim, that's the tomato top, and I'm going to assign it to that because I want this to be the area in which the cloth simulation doesn't have as much effect, and it's a place on the geometry where I can focus the shrinking factor to give it more of a wrinkled look, like you see a tomato when you pull a tomato off like the vine. And some of the tomatoes that have had heat applied to them or cooked, because these are supposed to be cooked tomatoes we're doing on here, not raw ones, you'll see it wrinkles more up there at that top where that vertex group is. So that's why I did that. So now I'm running playhead, and I'm going into here in the cloth sim for that object, and I am playing with the values because I don't really right off the top of my head know what I'm gonna get. So we're just playing with it until I see something that looks right or feels right. And here's the thing, I'm gonna alias all these anyway, so they're all gonna be identical, and just so we don't have to individually model out all these tomatoes, because the tomatoes are not going to be the key focus of the image. The key focus on the image is going to be the steak. And I'm going to show you little tricks in the second video how to draw the user's eye to that too. So just like before with the steak, I'm just kind of playing with some settings, and if you notice I keep running that playhead back to the beginning because that's forcing the reset of the simulation. So when I make pretty big changes like pressure and that kind of thing, I just go back and reset it from the beginning, and it runs the simulation right from the beginning with those applied changes, and I can see what it's actually going to look like. You don't always get what you want right from the get-go. I mean, I have seen people online like give tutorials about cloth sim. They seem to understand it enough. They kind of get exactly what they want the first time. But the truth is, I don't know if they're doing multiple edits in video. They're finding settings, they're writing it down, and then showing you. I'm literally showing you like what I do. Like, I don't do any of that. Now, if I was good enough to do it, I'd do it because it goes back to the whole time saving thing. But I'm just trying stuff until I see something I like. I'm looking for that from one frame that looks like what I want. So we're getting close. See how it's tapered up there to top? Yeah. that looks like a tomato. So as soon as I hit it, so I don't screw up and I'm willing to commit, so I convert it to a mesh. And now if you notice over there in the properties panel, the cloth simulation is no longer selected. That's because I basically committed to the cloth sim, I convert it to a mesh, and now Blender is no longer running that simulation on anything. So now I'm going to outline on that one tomato. I'm gonna give it a name, give it a color, and I've got it in its own collection. And what I want to do here, like I said, I'm going to alias it. So I'm going to hit Alt D. So that means it's sharing all of the same data blocks. So if I make an edit to the shape, size, or some of the detail on it, because we are going to do some sculpting work here, and I don't want to sculpt all of these. This is going to allow me to make changes to one of them, and those changes will propagate to all of the others. Also, this takes up less memory, because Blender's saying this is one object just copied multiple times. It's like identical copies. All right. So I want to add a little bit of variation to these by rotating them. Like I said, this could have been a great thing for geometry nodes, but I'm intentionally staying away from it in this video. I just think it's a little bit too much for my audience right now. So now let's look at it here. Let's do the cube action again. We're going to parent all these guys to this cube. Now we'll make a note while I'm in here showing you this in the video. There was some extra modeling I did on these tomatoes that you guys did not see. I basically made like a little stem at the top and made like 3 little leaves at like super low poly. Because in the texturing video, I've got an idea how I want to go about tackling that where it looks real. I just need some geometry to apply it to. All right, so basically what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to size that cube down to the top of these tomatoes and getting it kind of tight and close together so I can do the parenting thing just like we did with the steak and the asparagus before. And then that way we can manipulate all these at the same time. So now I'm going to give that empty a name. And I'm going to select all of the tomatoes in there, and I'm going to parent them with keeping the transformations to that empty. Just like that. And of course, you guys notice in my videos I save a lot. So we'll save that file. So now I'm just kind of tweaking some stuff, moving some stuff around. I'm just trying to now what in my mind, and what I'm doing is I'm looking at composition. I'm just looking at how things are situated on that plate. I don't want things shifted on one end of the plate. I want a nice balance. So I'm just playing with it until it looks right to me. And what I'm looking at now is that the tomatoes are going through, some of the tomatoes are going through the plate, because notice that plate, it's got a flat ridge at the top, and then it sucks down into like a little tiny bowl almost, and then it comes back out as a flat ridge on the other side. So I'm basically moving individual tomatoes that are in that collection so that they're not eating into the rim of the plate, because that's what they're doing right now. They're eating in partially the rim of the plate, and they're eating into the plate where the plate actually tapers down into like the little tiny bowl. So I'm grabbing everybody and I'm getting everybody above it, and then individually I can go in with the tomatoes and get them to where they're not intersecting there. So I'm just kind of looking around to see who else is either hovering above the air or whatever. So there's one that's floating. So I'm just gonna bring it down a little bit. And yet again, because I build things in ortho, I know globally what axis I'm on. It just makes things a lot easier for me. The reason why I'm going into cycles and looking at it, because I've got real-time lighting and I'm looking at the shadows. I'm looking to see if stuff looks like it's hovering above the surface. All right, that's why I'm doing that. So now what I'm doing is coming back in and I'm going to go into the sculpting of that bone again real quick, because I'm looking at it and I'm not real happy with it. So I'm using my clay strips brush, which essentially creates like this kind of harsh, flat cut into something when you are using the control key. And I just want that little section where that bone marrow is, I want it to look a little bit more pronounced. So I'm just kind of smoothing it out. So now I'm just using a regular clay brush and I'm building up the geometry on the outside of where I cut into that bone. Now let's isolate the bone and like just kind of mess with it a little bit. Going back into sculpt mode, and then from here I can just smooth out stuff that looks kind of harsh, just like we did before. But I'm just refining things a little bit, guys. And like I said, I can't keep that mouse on a perfect line like I can with that pen, but maybe in the next one I'll use the pen, because I'm used to using the pen for doing this kind of thing. And I don't want to burn too much time on this bone, but the bone is going to be it's going to be one element of the main character of the scene, which is that steak. So this is one place where I probably need to give it a little bit more love. And you can see on the tomatoes, there's like little ridges on the side of those too, like you see on a real tomato. But I just did not show you how I did it, because this video is borderline, in my opinion, is too long as it is. I don't usually get enough viewers on the longer videos. It's weird. It's like, I don't know if people just kind of looking for instant gratification, you know. But Blender, guys, is not something you're gonna learn in a 10-minute video, not unless it's something super easy. But building something like this, it does take time. So now what I want to do is I want to bring in use a cloth physics to bring in a piece of fabric that looks like I don't know what I was thinking, but it's not really a dinner napkin, but it's like a big towel, if you will, that I just want to have in the scene to kind of offset some of the color and the contrast. At first I was going to do the American flag, because it was July 4th I was working on this, but I decided against it because I didn't want a plate of food sitting on top of the flag. It's not like good flag etiquette, so I didn't want to do that. So I ended up changing it to, it's going to be a piece of material. But what's nice is in the texture video, I may change it to something else entirely, but the model is going to still be there. So bringing in a plane, or a cube, either one, give it some thickness, subdivide it, because cloth physics likes good subdivided surfaces to work with. And now I'm in cloth physics. I'm going to crank up my quality steps. It's going to give me a better result. And notice that it shot down there at the bottom. That's because gravity's on, and I do want gravity on because I want it to fall on the table and drape. So now that's where I realize I need to take everything in the scene and rotate it by -90 degrees so it's in the proper orientation. Which, when I first started building this, I should have built it from the top orthographic view, not the front. So that was on my bad, but I fixed it. And if it happens to you, I've shown you how to fix it. So now there's a cloth sim. I got like a cloth draped on the table. And now go back to my camera so you can see how this cloth is essentially going to interact with the scene here. I'm going to look at it in rendered view in cycles. You guys get the point. And here's another view, a perspective view, and something I did not show you, but if you look really close at the steak, there's like little sprinkles of chives on the top of it. Not chives, but rosemary. Little sprinkles of rosemary on the top. And basically what I did was I used a rigid body for that. But anyway, we're done modeling. If you like this video and this content, like and subscribe. There's going to be a lot more stuff coming. This is video 1 of 2. We're going to have another one where we're going to go into details about texturing. We're going to make this thing look real. Anyway, thank you for joining. See you on the next one. Talk to you soon. I'm out of here. Peace.